We're back. Oh no, I cannot hear. Can y'all hear me? Can you hear me, Diosa?
Okay. I can hear you. Can you hear me?
We got sound. We got sound.
Okay. Perfect. Okay. Welcome back to Grand Park. Joining us.
Thank you for joining us. So for those of you who are just now tuning in, we are your hosts for the day. My name is Mala.
And
we're LA, born and raised podcasters. We're producers, we're writers, and we're so excited to be here with you today as Locatora Radio, introducing. We're going to be introducing to you all today. So up next, we have Samanta Helou Hernandez, who is going to be talking about swap meets and documenting Los Angeles, documenting communities. For those of you who love the swap meet, there's so many different Slauson Supermall, the Slauson swap meet, there's Santa Fe Springs, there's right? And swap meets have historically been gathering places for Black and Brown communities in LA. And Samanta Helou Hernandez documents the last days of the union that work the end of an era, union swap meets last days. So we're going to bring on Samanta. And do you want to tell the folks at home about what Samanta is going to be talking to us about and who's helping to put all of this together today?
Yeah, absolutely. By Jardín del Arte from the Office of Supervisor Solis. And Samantha will be talking about gentrification and the pains that communities get gentrified, right? And like Mala mentioned, she will be focusing on swap meets and swap meet. So we're going to have a lot of great things in store.
Yeah, and something that is really important for us to talk about is how these issues, these topics, gentrification, displacement, they're not just theories, right? They're very affect families and Angelinos. So we can talk a little bit ourselves, right, about what gentrification has meant for us and our communities and our families. I mean, you know, like I said, born and raised, my mother was born and raised in Los Angeles. My grandmother immigrated in LA longer than she was in Mexico, right? And she has lived in this beautiful house in a historic part of Los Angeles for like over 60 years and raised her kids here. And my because, you know, gentrification means that we can't afford to buy in our own neighborhood anymore, you know? So family has like moved. This is part of it, right? This is what happens when forces like this impact communities. So we're so excited and so grateful to Samanta for coming on today to talk about her really important project.
Not just renters and homeowners, but also storefronts and marketplaces and grocery stores and mom and pop shops and restaurants. Those are all of the different places and spaces that are Samanta talk about all of this today, along with Marty from Grand Park.
It's going to be fabulous. Talk. So there's going to be a little bit of a down period. So get a snack, stretch, eat something, drink some water, and then join us again for more programming.
Engage with us online.
Samantha, thank you so much to Locatora Radio. Before we get started with our conversation, Samantha, I want to say thank you to all of you that have been very patient. I know we're having some technical difficulties. This is the first time that we do. Also, a huge thank you to Locatora Radio for holding that down, and to all of our producers on the other side of the screen that are doing everything. And with that said, I want to welcome Samanta Helou. Are great.
Thank you. I was just saying, I'm like, I wonder if it's going to start making a lot of noise.
love it. And you're so, I love it. And you're so on theme. I remember my first nameplate and I actually got it at a swap meet. So yes.
Yes.
I have had the pleasure of interviewing Samantha so many times and talking and discussing about her research. And this is the first time ever. I feel like I've never written one, and I really want to tackle who you are as a person. So, Samanta Helou Hernandez, she's a truth holder, and she captures and documents specifically those of third spaces and otherized communities. So when we first curated this festival, we thought of you because of your sharp social commentary, because you're not afraid to display what makes us uncomfortable about our city. And you discuss what really needs to be discussed. From poverty to displacement, you love Los Angeles through the stories that you tell. We're very excited. And we do think that it's a necessary conversation for us to have in terms of the displacement of Black and Brown communities. So thank you so much for documenting this and for accepting to be here in Grant Park's Early Voices and sharing more about your work, sharing more about for Los Angeles while also keeping it accountable for those community histories that we are erasing. So welcome, Samantha, to our virtual Grant Park.
Thank you. It looks beautiful.
Too. Samantha, before we get started into the swap me questions and we go into third spaces, I'm going to ask you more that you grew up recurring to. So what were those third spaces that you would call them a community space?
I mean, starting out in Mexico when I was a little girl, obviously, mercados are a huge part of communities. So going there with my grandma, going there with my mom. I think in Mexico, there's also a lot of gathering spaces, like in Plaza, spaces that I remember as a little girl. And then once I came to the United States, actually, one of, not the first place that I went to, but I remember going to my first like swap meet, like California swap meet in Escondido, California. And it was with some family. They went on weekends to do their shopping, to buy clothes for their kids, to buy toys. And it was actually the first time I heard Selena. And it was like a really, and ever since then, I have really fond memories of the swap meet. And then growing up in Escondido, I remember after school, I would walk to the swap meet with my friends to indoor swap meets and hang out there. Spaces I remember. And also, I mean, growing up in kind of like a small city in North County, San Diego, there wasn't a lot of spaces for teenagers. So a lot of times it was like hang out in front of the movie, create your own third spaces, you know, where it wasn't like a dedicated space for teenagers because we just didn't have that.
And Samantha, you were mentioning your constant traveling or migration in your family. So now, walk me through your neighborhood. What are the stories of your neighborhood? What is your neighborhood? Tell me a little bit more.
Yes. That's part of East Hollywood. It's right north of Koreatown, south of Los Feliz, west of Silver Lake, and east of Hollywood. That's obviously East Hollywood. Virgil Avenue. So that's kind of where people do their shopping. It's pretty walkable for the community, which is mostly Central American, but actually historically, have lived in the neighborhood throughout the years. But since the civil wars in Central America, there's been a huge migration since the 80s from Central Americans. And Virgil Avenue is really the place that people congregate and do their shopping. There's carnicerias, Salvadoran restaurants, there was a Guatemalan bakery, and just like a bunch of businesses that came right at the border of Silver Lake and East Hollywood, and Hoover Street, sorry, is the dividing line. There's been kind of this influx of a new demographic that is changing, have now closed and are either under renovation or they've opened as new places like vintage stores, new restaurants, and condos. So it's been kind of in an influx of change right now because of that gentrification that's currently happening. So there's been quite a lot of erasure happening.
And about that erasure, Samantha, because the work that you document is to highlight and illuminate those stories that constantly are erased. So talk to me about how you were inspired and curious about documenting the change in Virgil Village.
So around 2015, I started taking photos of the neighborhood with my camera. Just as a photographer, I was interested in documenting the place that I lived, but I was starting to notice that things were changing really quickly, especially on Hoover, which is that border between Silver Lake and East Hollywood. There was a Korean-owned market that closed and became a wine store, like a little vintage knick-knack shop that was owned by a Mexican family, closed and became something else. So there was like a lot of changes happening, and I started noticing that. And then the apartment building that I lived in, which was owned by an older Filipino man, and everyone that lived there were all Latino immigrants and their families, and they had lived there 10, 20, 30, even 40 years. And the Filipino man wanted to retire because he had owned it for like 40 years. So he was ready to retire and ended up selling it to a management company. And as soon as that management company took over, we kind of knew what was going to happen. So we ended up getting a letter that we could either take an amount of money and leave, or we could be put in another place for 6 months while they did renovations and then come back, and our rent would be raised $100. So they really made, especially for a lot of families that needed that money. And that's kind of like an incentive that they use, because what they want is to be able to raise the rent. So because it was rent controlled. So I saw how little by little all of my neighbors started leaving and moving out, and then find a place literally across the street. It's kind of crazy. And some of my neighbors moved below me, thankfully. But a lot of them left their states where they could buy a house. And I saw, as when I looked at my window, the window that's behind me, I saw, and the demographics changed completely. It was now really all white people, single white people. And that really hit me, just to see that the erasure. There was one neighbor, Sylvia, that I had, that she like was almost in tears, because she's like, I was literally brought home from the hospital to this apartment, and I had my kids here, and my father died here. So like, imagine like these big milestones in your life, and now you're leaving, and there's really, and that really hit me. And I realized that with the resources that I have, which is camera, I have a journalism degree, I have an iPhone, I have access to social media, that I could do something, archiving different subcultures and scenes like veteranas and rucas, map points. And I thought that it would be a good idea to use social media to basically record the legacies of the people that were being displaced, and also document how that displacement was happening, and what was happening to the landscape and how it was changing, because no one else was documenting it at the time in the neighborhood like that. And I didn't want that to be forgotten, because I didn't get a chance to document my neighbors at the time, and now their stories are gone, you know? I'm in touch with maybe a few of them, but a lot of them I've lost contact with, and all those stories are now gone. So that was really important for me, and I started This Side of Hoover, which was an Instagram account where I started documenting the changing landscape. and the legacies of the neighborhood.
And that's, I think, part of what you do, Samantha, is that you allow to illuminate the stories of those that have been disenfranchised and ostracized. But there's a beauty in the stories that you collect. You really highlight our Filipino community. You highlight the Central American journey to Los Angeles and their way of being here also, and the displacement that they're going through, our Mexican community, our Black community. And there's such a beauty in having to see almost this collective fear, but also this collective resiliency in our communities, that it takes me to the question of spaces and where do we actually interact and where do we call these spaces a third space, which is like a second home. So it takes me to the Union Swap Meet. This, and tell me a little bit more about your learnings in documenting the Swap Meet.
Yeah, so the Swap Meet, which is on the corner, or was on the corner of Vermont, or I guess it's East Hollywood, but it's down the street. And I would always pass by it. And originally, what you're seeing right now is the new murals that were up there. But before, I think there's a photo of the old murals that were there. But it always caught my eye that it was like just super colorful. And I thought about swap meets again because I hadn't been to one since I was a teenager back in Escondido. And it always caught my eye, so I started like going in and walking around. Sometimes I would buy like jewelry or little accessories or grab some food, and it really just brought really fond memories of being a teenager and going to swap meets after school. So I thought, this would be a really good thing to document, the importance of swap meets in Los Angeles. And then by the time I got around to actually documenting it is when I found out that it was closing. So like when I documented it, it was a year out before it closed, and there was already a lot of empty spaces. So there was like this urgency to document this place because it had been there since 1986, and some of the vendors had been there since 1986, and it was a place for the community to like really buy everything you needed and get all the services that you needed. You could fix your shoes, get your hair done, buy a pet, buy back to school clothes, pay your bills, send money to your home country, get acupuncture, get vitamins from Mexico. You could really like do everything in one day there. You could eat. At some point back in the day, there was music, there was giveaways. It was really like a destination and a place that you could just spend your entire weekend there with your family. So I think I really wanted to capture at least what was left, because by the time I started going there, it was already pretty empty. There wasn't a lot of foot traffic. And, with swap meets, it's twofold because, of course, gentrification is a huge part of it, but it's also that the younger generations just aren't. Before the latest generation, younger people started going to malls, and then after that, we're shopping online. So there was also a huge change in the way that people shopped. So those two things like really affected the swap meet, and that's why they're kind of a dying breed at this point. And I really wanted to preserve those histories and really capture the importance of the Fashion Center, which is now a Walmart. I mean, that had such a significant place in hip hop history. That was like where you could find the first NWA records when mainstream music business wasn't selling them yet, So that they're like historical landmarks. That's why Kendrick Lamar danced on top of it in one. They are really historical landmarks and staples of the community. So I felt like I needed to capture officially closed.
And Samantha, just what you're mentioning right now is swap meets go beyond their commercial function. So swap meets are not just spaces, as you were mentioning, whether you buy something or you trade something or you're getting a mixtape, there's a sentimental value, but there's also a community identity. I wonder if how people would feel more safe and comfortable buying around a swap meet rather than going to a mall, or how they would feel more comfortable being able to speak their own language in a space like a swap meet. What values did you see being highlighted in a swap meet while you were documenting, but also from your own personal experience? What are those other values that we don't talk about that are actually rooted in a swap meet?
Yeah, so I mean, swap meets, if you really think about it, they're kind of for and by the community. So oftentimes the vendors themselves live in the neighborhood. And as opposed to malls, which have kind of like corporate stores and maybe some stores that cater to the community, at the swap meet, every single store is meant to cater to the specific needs of that community. So it holds a value because it's something that really is for and by the community, and it's twofold for both vendors and customers, because one, for vendors, it's a business opportunity where they might not find it in another like mainstream economy, because maybe they don't speak English or they don't have the money to open a brick and mortar. And the swap meet really offers you a place to start your own business and make a living when you first arrive in the country, or when you're shut out of other opportunities because of, other reasons. And the swap meet really provided that space for people to make a living, like learn English or have to go through the difficulties of trying to raise enough money to, I mean, it's not even the difficulties, it's not available for most people. And then for the customers, it's a similar thing, right? Like it's affordable prices there for your family. And it's also a gathering space. It's a place where you make friends. It's a place where you speak your language, where you listen to the music that you like, where you take your... Sometimes there's like games you can play there, there's concerts. So it holds this like valuable opportunities for people to buy things at affordable prices and be able to have a business, but it also provides a place for people to feel and as if it's something of their own. And I think that's really important. That's why, like, for example, Olga, who started out selling records, she basically did market research to cater her music to the community. So she was like, okay, Hondurans like punta, Salvadorans like cumbia, Northern Mexicans like banda. So she started carrying all these things because she knew her community needed it. And those community members felt valued because they were literally being catered to. And then when you go in there, you really see that it's like this family environment. I mean, all the vendors have been there for decades, so they all know each other. Olga, her daughter, grew up at the swap meet, like literally grew up helping her mom, and then opened up her own stand selling Dickies and Pro Clubs and clothes for people. And I mean, when I posted some of these photos, I even had people commenting that they went on their first date with their spouse there, So it's this like twofold place where you can really like buy the things you need, but then also hang out and create community and feel at home and like it's a place of your own.
And they're so valuable. Thank you for sharing that, Samantha. Just to put in my 2 cents, I agree with everything that you're saying. It relates 100%. I grew up going to the swap meet and then wearing like the rip-off brand clothes and having to go to school, and kids knew you weren't wearing the real one. But that was home for us, and that was the access that we had. And it was a safe space. Even though my parents had access to any other mall, that was a space we would go to for the food, for the music, for the burned CDs, sometimes cassettes. Thank you for talking more about the space itself. I want to learn more about the stories in this, the feel of the swap meet. So while you were documenting the stories, please let us know more of these stories. We have our producer on the other end. So if you mention the name of the story that you want to bring up, we'll bring up the image. Tell us.
Yeah. So, well, just to give like a little bit of like a history of the swap meet, I kind of briefly mentioned it before, but it was opened in 1986 by Julie. He was a Korean immigrant that modeled his home country in Korea that I forget the name in Korean, but it's these indoor markets where you can buy affordable things, very much like the swap meet here. Obviously, markets are ancient, but he modeled it after that, which he saw in his home country, and opened city and opened Union Swap Meet in 1986. And one of the first vendors was Olga, which I think we saw. Olga used to be a street vendor, and then decided that she wanted to have something a little bit more stable and wanted to feel independent. And that's when she came to Union Swap Meet in 1986, so the year that it opened. And like I mentioned, she started out selling records, then cassettes, then CDs that catered to the community. And then later on, as obviously streaming happened, she started selling incense and pipes and other objects that became her main source of business. As you can see, she still was selling CDs, but it was really not her main source of business. So she's really evolved as a vendor and as a business owner. And her daughter grew up in the swap meet, then opened her own business. And when I was interviewing her, she really valued the swap meet because for her it was a place where she met a lot of friends. And one of the quotes that she told me, she was like, "It's been beautiful. I've really gotten to know the sentiments of a lot of people and their stories, whether it was joy or sorrow. I've really gotten to know the stories of my customers and of my fellow vendors." And there's a Korean woman who owned another stall near her. And, Olga doesn't really speak English, and that woman didn't really speak English, but they like hug each other every time they see each other and just like speak to each other in broken English as best as they can. So it was really sweet to see this interaction between these two communities. Another vendor is Francisco, who owns the shoe repair. He's from Guatemala and learned to make shoes when he was 8 years old. His mother taught him. So he really learned leather work back home in Guatemala, and he brought that knowledge to the United States when he immigrated and was working for someone else. And again, he wanted to be independent, and the swap meet provided him that opportunity to be independent without having to have the money to invest in a brick and mortar. And he's also he was at the swap meet for I think over 20 years. And he's truly a gem. I mean, like his knowledge, he knows how to make a shoe from scratch, like not just repair. He knows how to repair leather jackets, anything leather. And his business actually was still doing well because anything that was service related was something that like still hung on, because obviously you can't buy shoe repair online. So he also valued the swap meet as a place that allowed him to survive financially. And his two sons also owned a little stall in the swap meet where they sold like a little convenience store. Basically, they sold snacks and random knickknacks. So again, this is like a multi-generational space that allows multiple generations to have a business. And he is, I believe, opening up a brick and mortar. He moved to another location, so thankfully he's still working and doing shoe repair. And next to him, you can see is the alterations. So he is a retired doctor and took over the business for his friend when she passed away. And he was just bored and decided to do alteration. And when I posted his photo, a lot of people commented just like, "Oh, where am I gonna fix my jeans now?" And like he fixed my jeans before I went to high school. So there was these really beautiful stories of, people did things that were necessities at the swap meet. They got things done, but it was also really sweet because it marked a lot of their milestones, like going to high school, starting high school, and that's where you went to get your shorts fixed, or your favorite boots, if they broke, that's, for 10 years, you got them fixed with Francisco. So that's one of the stories that I that was really beautiful. And then the other one is Christian, who owns the pet store. He is second generation, so he was born here, but his parents are from Guatemala. And he grew up, he's from the neighborhood. He grew up coming to the swap meet since he was a toddler. So he remembers spending like full days with his family, shopping. And he says that when he was a kid, there was another pet shop there, and he would buy pets while his parents weren't watching, and then hide them, and then take them out as soon as he got home. So he had this like passion for animals, and eventually opened up his own stall. And then he ended up opening I think he had like a total of 4 stalls that sold pet supplies and pets. So he really became an entrepreneur. He's, I believe at the time he was like 20 something, but he opened it, I think, when he was 18. So he was a teenager when he opened up his own business. And he talks about, he's like, it's my passion. I love pets, and it's also a business. So he's hoping to open up his own brick and mortar, but he talked about like, this place holds a lot of memories for people. And I came here as a kid and I grew up here, and now I have my own business here, so it was a really valuable place for him. And he understands the cultural significance, but also that his generation is not really shopping there anymore. And I think lastly, Sonia, who owns the beauty salon. So she is from Mexico and had the beauty salon at the swap meet for over 20 years. And people, honestly, like, she talked about how the apartment buildings next door to the swap meet, a lot of them were her customers. And similarly to the apartment building that I had lived in, they were paid to leave. And a lot of them went to places like the Valley, like Asperia, and they continued to come. They continued to drive all the way to East Hollywood to get their hair done with her because they had done so their whole lives. And when I posted her photo on my Instagram, the comments were really beautiful. I mean, I had so many people saying like, I still get my hair done with her, or I grew up getting my hair done with her and I don't live in the city anymore, but my mom still goes to her, or I used to live there, but I still drive there to get my hair done because no one else is going to do my hair. And it really became like this community space that kids went to until they were adults and continued to go to. And she actually moved to another location as well, not a swap meet, but another location nearby. And, it was really sad for her. Like, when I first interviewed her, she was like, are they really closing it? It's almost like she was in disbelief. And I was like, yeah, that's what they say. And at the time that I interviewed all them last year, they didn't really know when exactly it was going to close. It was kind of all up in the air, and no one really knew exactly when that would happen. So they were all just kind of bracing themselves, continuing to go through their days. But there was this fear. And like Sonia, she's like, are they really doing it? It was almost like, how can they? I've been here basically since I emigrated here. I've been working here. So those are kind of the stories of the swap meet.
And also, Samantha, it's just displacement and gentrification and the changing landscape. It just further illuminates how our communities are being erased, our histories are being lost. So the work that you do is admirable to preserve our culture, to preserve those histories, but also just to keep them alive, for us to be able to keep on speaking about that and talking about that. When you were talking to your subjects, whether that is Olga or whether that's Francisco, when you were talking to the community, what is a common theme that you hear in them? And I know that you hear in all of the stories.
I think a common theme is that the swap meet really is a community center. Like, aside from this place to shop, it's a community center, and it was a place that allowed them to survive as immigrants. Actually, another vendor that I think I forgot to mention, Lilia, who has the money order place, if we can pull her up, that would be great. So she has been there also for, I believe, like 10 or 15 years. And she was helping so much deeper than that because she really listened to the stories of migration. She had people from all over Mexico and Central America that would consistently come to her to send money home. And she remembers, she was almost like a community historian, because she remembers that when Trump got elected, for example, people were really, really afraid. And she listened to those stories. People took money out of their banks and were constantly sending back their money back home because they were really afraid of being deported. And that was, she noticed through her business these changes in the community and the fears and the histories. And she had many, many customers that when they first arrived, started coming to her to send money and worked 3-4 jobs at a time to send money back home and build houses in their home countries. And then eventually they accomplished their goals and left and went back to their home country. So there's like these really amazing stories that she listened to. And she says like, really the main reason she loves her job is because she feels this camaraderie between her customers where they trust her and she trusts them, and they're able to like share this really special connection over something that seems so transactional, right? Like sending money, like going to the bank. It's something that is so transactional, but for them it's so deep and so personal. And that's kind of like the common theme, that it was so much more than a transaction. It was like getting to know people and creating friends and creating communities and being able to feel safe in a new country. I mean, Olga from the music store said, you know, we didn't want to go to malls because we couldn't speak English. And at the swap meet, we could speak Spanish. And that made you feel a little bit more like you were back home, because when you're an immigrant, it's a sad thing and you're really lonely. So it really created that community and helped kind of make the loneliness a little bit better and made people feel a little less lonely.
Samantha, do you have any updates of the people that you interviewed? Do you know what's happening to this space? Have you been in touch with any of these communities?
So if you pull up the photos of the signs that people posted up, we can see where some of them went. They actually, one of the last businesses that was open was the money order place, because it was basically all empty besides that. But a lot of the businesses started posting these signs of where they've moved to. So thankfully, most of the people that I interviewed, so that's Naomi's Beauty Salon. She has a new location on Vermont. The Shoe Repair has a new location. So most of them are moving on to other places, whether it's brick and mortars or other markets. But yeah, the swap meet officially closed in March. It's gated up and closed. You can no longer go inside, and it's it's going to be demolished. So the Lees that owned it, so the father, the Julie who opened it in 1986, he retired, and their kids took over the swap meet, and we're really trying to kind of modernize it and make it attractive to the new demographics of the community. So they were hosting like pop-up like night markets. They try to bring in Etsy vendors. They brought in, that's why the exterior changed. They added that mural of old time vendors. They put, those wings that people can take Instagram photos for, or photos for Instagram, and it didn't really work. So they ended up leasing it for 99 years to a development company that's going to demolish it and then construct a 7-story multi-use complex with residential units. And so it'll be a mixed-use place with retail space on the ground floor. We don't know when it's going to be demolished, but the market is officially closed now. And I don't think vendors are going to have an opportunity to open up in their retail space. I think it's going to be geared for a completely different population.
And there's probably a really good chance that the retail center that is opening will not look like the swap meet, or probably host folks that would visit this space.
It's going to be anything geared to the existing community. It's probably going to be the same thing as what's happened on Virgil. Yeah.
Yeah. So when I first started the segment and I started interviewing you and introducing you, I said that you love Los Angeles, but you what it also does to our communities. What recommendation or what hopes or desires do you have for us to be able to illuminate those stories that are currently being erased, for us to be able to I know you picked up your camera, you're a journalist, you did it your way, but anything that you would suggest for any people out there for them to be involved in life?
Yeah, I mean, gentrification is obviously such a complex topic, and the solutions are multifold. They involve policy change, personal change. It's a multi-part solution that I don't have all the answers to, obviously, but I think on the documentation side of things, the reason why I really did it for my community is because the history, and when you erase the culture, you erase the people. And it was really important for me to preserve their stories. Like when you're driving, I don't know if this has happened to you, but you're driving, walking, biking around the bus in LA, and you notice that a building has been demolished or there's a new building, and you cannot, this happens to me, and that really, really bothers me, because that to me means that someone's story and a community story was erased if I don't know what happened there, and if we don't know what happened there. And I didn't want that to happen in my community. I want people to know why they make the city such a vibrant place. So I think the suggestions that I have is, if you live in a community where, even if this isn't happening yet or it already is happening, just document it, take photos. And people will be like, why do you want to know my story? But to me, they're the most important people, you know, and they create the communities, they create the culture of our city. And we need to know what's lost with gentrification, because if we don't know what we lose, how can we really be motivated to make a change, you know? And then on the more practical end, I think if the LA Tenants Union, read up on tenants' rights, and if you can share that with your family members that maybe don't speak English, rights are in case something does happen, and then just try to support as many businesses that have been in the community for a long time as possible.
Also, for everyone who is watching us and you want to see more of the images, they are now being hosted on Gram. Captions to those that Samantha actually wrote, and you'll see more pictures on our site. For those that are interested in knowing more of the stories that Samantha is documenting, please visit This Side of Hoover, again, This Side of Hoover on Instagram. Samantha, recently you actually posted something on Twitter and you got me very hungry. So you mentioned about a Salvadorian pupuseria that is currently open despite COVID. Any suggestions that you have for us? Because I know you're always documenting the community. Anything that you would probably tell us that is currently open that we can go out there and support?
Yeah, so that's California Girl. It's a Salvadoran restaurant that I've documented a lot on this side of Hoover, and they're currently open for pickup and delivery. They're wearing masks and gloves, and as well as I believe there's a Mexican restaurant across the street that's still open for takeout. They've always been takeout, actually, so it's great. And all the mercados, like the markets, the carnicerias, they're all still open. And honestly, it's some of the best places to shop right now because they're not as crowded, and they tend to have all the supplies that people need. They don't run out as quickly as bigger grocery stores, and you're supporting smaller businesses. So yeah, those are great places to support. And in your own community too, if you can try to support the smaller markets and businesses, if you can, try to do so, because it is a really hard time for them financially.
Definitely. Samantha, before we wrap this up, RLA Voices is really a gathering of the diverse voices and expressions in Los Angeles. I want to hear a little bit more about what do you think when you think about LA? So before we close this segment, I want to let you with that question. I want to leave you with that question. What do you think when you think about Los Angeles?
Wow. I think of all the I think what I love about Los Angeles is that it's not architecturally consistent. You know, every block is different expression. Like mercados painting murals outside their markets of, you know, the Virgen de Guadalupe. There's people making shrines in front of their homes. Just like all the colors and sounds and the vibrancy of the city. I think that's like the first thing I think about. I think about the bugambilias that in the spring just like take over the city and over fences. It's just this wild beauty. And I think of the Black and brown communities through their art, through their food. That's kind of what I think about LA. I love walking in LA. I know people are saying that now everyone's walking with everything going on, but I haven't had a car since I've lived here, and it's just you experience it differently being on the bus, the community that you experience there as well. So think about it.
And definitely, and you love Los Angeles so much, and we love LA, and I think also taking care of each other and taking care of our communities. So thank you so much, Samantha, for everyone who is watching. .org, and you can see more of those there. We also want to thank the Office of Hilda Solis and her vision for Jardín del Arte for making this possible to have a space where we can talk about our community. Thank you so much, Samantha. Thank you for joining us.
Inviting me to be part of this. It's amazing.
Of course.
Adios.
Of course. And we're going to go back to Locatora Radio. And before we do, thank you, Locatora Radio, as well, for holding it down. And I want to do a shout out for all of our team. And thank you, Samantha.
Bye. Adios.
¿Ya le pagas?
Hi.
Hello.
We're back.
Thank you, Samantha and Marty, for that amazing plática. That was so informative, so inspiring to see the photos, the artwork, all of it, and hear the stories and the narratives.
Absolutely. Samantha inspired me to put my nameplate on. Thank you for the reminder. And we will be back at 2:15 with some music, with more programming, arts, culture. So join us at 2:15.